In the grim darkness of the far future, there are fates that transcend death itself. Among the most tragic are those who cannot die, even when death would be a mercy. These are the Dreadnoughts, warriors of the Adeptus Astartes, who have been entombed within walking sarcophagi of adamantium and ceramite, their broken bodies sustained by arcane technology as they continue to serve the Emperor across the millennia. But imagine, if you will, a fate even more terrible than this half-life existence. Imagine awakening from the cold embrace of stasis sleep, the darkness that has held you for decades or even centuries lifting like morning fog, only to discover that everything you believed in has been shattered. That the Primarch you served, the father of your genetic line, the being you would have died for without hesitation, has turned traitor. That half of your brothers have betrayed the Imperium and pledged their souls to the ruinous powers of chaos. That the galaxy you knew, the great crusade you fought to build, has been torn asunder by civil war. This is the reality that greeted certain dreadnoughts of the Pre-Heresy era. Warriors who had been interred during the golden age of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor walked among his sons and the dream of a unified humanity seemed within reach. They went to sleep in an age of enlightenment and glory, only to wake in an age of treachery and darkness. Today, we delve into one of the most profound tragedies of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. We will explore what it truly means when a pre-heresy dreadnought learns that his Primarch has turned traitor. We will examine the psychological torment, the shattered bonds of brotherhood, the weight of impossible choices, and the terrible burden of carrying such knowledge across 10,000 years of darkness. The story begins not with betrayal, but with understanding what these warriors are and what they have already sacrificed. To understand the magnitude of this tragedy, we must first comprehend what it means to be interred within a dreadnought. This is no simple matter of piloting a vehicle or wearing particularly advanced armor. The process of becoming a dreadnought is, in many ways, a death that refuses to end. When a space marine suffers wounds so catastrophic that even the advanced medical science of the apothecaries cannot save him, when his body has been reduced to a broken shell that should by all rights be releasing its last breath, the chapter faces a choice. For most warriors, mercy would dictate a swift end, allowing them to die with honor and have their gene seed harvested for future generations. But for the greatest heroes, for those whose tactical knowledge, combat experience, and sheer force of will are deemed too valuable to lose, there exists another option. An option that many consider a great honor, but which carries with it a burden that few outside the dreadnought halls can truly comprehend. The warrior's ruined body is taken to the depths of the chapter's fortress monastery, to the sacred halls where the tech marines maintain their most precious relics. There, in ceremonies that blend religious reverence with arcane technology, what remains of the space marine is removed from his broken form. Perhaps only a torso remains, or vital organs suspended in amniotic fluid. The brain, that most essential component, must be preserved at all costs. These remnants of humanity are then encased within the armored sarcophagus at the heart of a dreadnought chassis. What follows is a transformation that strips away nearly every sensation that defines human existence. The warrior no longer sees through eyes, but through optical sensors that translate reality into data streams. He no longer hears with ears, but through acoustic receptors that pick up sound as mechanical vibrations. The sense of touch, that most fundamental of human experiences, is replaced by pressure readings on armor plating. Even breath, that most basic rhythm of life, becomes the mechanical wheeze of life support systems that keep the ruined flesh alive within its tomb. The dreadnought's consciousness exists in a state that hovers between life and death, between man and machine. The neural interfaces that connect the pilot's brain to the chassis create an extended nervous system, allowing him to control the massive war machine as if it were his own body. But this connection comes at a terrible price. The sheer mental strain of maintaining such an interface, of processing the overwhelming amount of sensory data from a body that weighs several tons and stands 3 to 5 meters tall, gradually erodes the sanity of even the strongest minds. This is why dreadnoughts sleep. Between battles, they are placed in stasis, their consciousness suspended in a void so complete that when they wake, they often cannot remember if they ever truly existed at all. For some, the sleep lasts months. For others, years or even decades pass in what feels like the blink of an eye. Time loses all meaning in the darkness of stasis. A dreadnought might fight in a campaign on one world, be returned to sleep, and wake to find that everyone he knew in that battle has grown old and died, that the chapter has recruited and trained entirely new generations of space marines who know him only as a legend from the past. The isolation is profound. While in stasis, the dreadnought exists in sensory deprivation so complete that it makes a prison cell seem like paradise by comparison. There are no dreams to comfort the sleeping mind, no sense of time passing, no awareness of the world outside. Just an endless void, broken only when the chapter's need is great enough to justify awakening these ancient warriors once more. When consciousness returns, it comes with a disorientation that would drive a normal human insane. The dreadnought must remember how to think, how to perceive reality through mechanical senses, how to move limbs that are actually weapon-sound systems. For those few precious moments of awakening, before the training and conditioning reassert themselves, the warrior experiences a moment of pure existential terror. What am I? Where am I? How long have I been gone? These questions scream through a mind that can barely remember what it once was. And yet, despite all of this, most dreadnoughts consider their interment an honor. They are the living embodiment of their chapter's history, walking monuments to battles fought and victories won. Their tactical knowledge spans centuries or even millennia. Their experience in war is unmatched by any but their fellow ancients. When they speak, entire chapter councils listen with reverence. When they stride onto the battlefield, their presence alone can turn the tide of war. But this honor comes with a price that compounds with each awakening. The organic components of the dreadnought's brain, the parts that make him human rather than simply a sophisticated war machine, gradually deteriorate over time. Memories fade like morning mist. Emotions become muted, filtered through layers of mechanical translation. The ability to feel connection to others, to experience joy or sorrow or love, slowly erodes until all that remains is purpose, the mission, the battle, the endless war. The older a dreadnought becomes, the more he resembles a weapon that can think rather than a man who has become a weapon. Venerable dreadnoughts, those who have served for 1,000 years or more, often struggle to recall specific details of their past lives. They remember the broad strokes of battles fought, but the faces of comrades who died beside them become indistinct shadows. They know they once had names, once had personalities that extended beyond their function as instruments of war. But those aspects of self have been ground away by the passage of centuries. This is the existence that awaited all dreadnoughts, whether they served during the Great Crusade or in the dark millennium that followed. This is the half-life they accepted, the sacrifice they made in service to the Emperor and their chapter. This is what it means to be a dreadnought, to be simultaneously revered and pitied, honored and forgotten, alive and dead. And for those who were interred before the Horus Heresy, who went to sleep in an age of brotherhood and unity, this existence was about to become infinitely more complicated. Before we can understand the betrayal, we must understand what was lost. The Great Crusade was more than just a military campaign. It was the manifestation of humanity's greatest dream, a time when anything seemed possible. Imagine the galaxy as it was in those golden years of the late 30th millennium. The Emperor of mankind walked among his sons, not yet confined to the Golden Throne. The 18 known Primarchs led their legions across the stars, bringing world after world into imperial compliance. The Space Marine legions numbered in the hundreds of thousands, their brotherhood unshakable, their purpose clear. They were not merely soldiers, but the instruments of humanity's manifest destiny. They were building an imperium that would span the galaxy, a secular paradise where reason would triumph over superstition, where humanity would finally claim its birthright among the stars. For a dreadnought of that era, existence had a clarity and purpose that is difficult to comprehend in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. When you awoke from stasis, you knew with absolute certainty that you were fighting for something noble and achievable. The Great Crusade was not an endless holding action against extinction, but an advancing tide of progress and enlightenment. Every world brought into compliance was another step toward the Emperor's vision. Every Xenos threat eliminated was another obstacle removed from humanity's path to greatness. The bonds between legions were genuine during those years. Though each legion had its own character, its own methods of warfare, its own culture shaped by their Primarch's personality, they were all brothers in the truest sense. A dreadnought of the Emperor's children could fight alongside warriors of the Iron Hands or Lunar Wolves and know that they shared not just a common purpose, but a common dream. The rivalry between legions was the healthy competition of brothers striving to outdo each other in service to their father, not the bitter enmity that would come later. The Primarchs themselves were figures of wonder in those days. To a Space Marine, to witness one's Primarch was to behold living perfection, the Emperor's will made manifest in flesh and blood. Each Primarch was a masterwork of genetic engineering, a being that transcended mortal limitations while still remaining recognizably human. They were generals, statesmen, warriors, and leaders whose mere presence could inspire ordinary men to acts of extraordinary courage. For a dreadnought, the connection to one's Primarch carried even more weight than it did for regular Space Marines. The process of interment often included ceremonies presided over by high-ranking officers, or even the Primarch himself. To hear your Gene Father's voice as you were sealed within your new tomb, to receive his blessing as you took on this burden of eternal service, was considered one of the highest honors imaginable. That voice, those words, would be among the last clear memories you carried into the darkness of stasis. Consider what this meant to these warriors. A dreadnought of the Lunar Wolves could remember fighting beside Horus Lupercal himself, the War Master, first among equals among the Primarchs and the Emperor's most beloved son. He might recall campaigns where Horus's tactical genius turned certain defeat into glorious victory, or quiet moments in the aftermath of battle where the War Master moved among his sons with genuine affection and pride. These memories became treasures, precious reminders of why the sacrifice of interment was worthwhile. Or imagine a dreadnought of the word-bearers who had witnessed Lorgar's passionate speeches about the imperial truth, the rejection of gods and superstition in favor of reason and the light of human achievement. To such a warrior, the Primarch's words about building a better future for humanity would have been a source of strength during the long years of service. The memory of Lorgar's conviction, his absolute faith in the righteousness of the Crusade, would have sustained the dreadnought through countless battles. For dreadnoughts of the Death Guard, there was the steady, implacable presence of Mortarion, a Primarch who led from the front and never asked his sons to face dangers he would not face himself. For those of the Thousand Sons, there was Magnus the Red, whose psychic might and pursuit of knowledge promised to elevate humanity to heights previously unimaginable. For warriors of the Iron Warriors, there was Perturabo's genius in siege warfare and his seemingly limitless capacity for endurance in the face of the most grinding campaigns. Each legion had its own culture, its own traditions, its own relationship with their Primarch, but all shared in the certainty that they were fighting for something greater than themselves. The Great Crusade was not perfect. There were setbacks and tragedies, Worlds that had to be brought into compliance by force rather than diplomacy, civilian populations caught in the crossfire of liberation. But even these dark moments were contextualized within the larger dream. Sacrifices today would ensure a better tomorrow. The ends justified the means because the end being sought was nothing less than the salvation and ascension of the entire human species. A dreadnought who went to sleep during the Great Crusade did so with the comfortable certainty that when he next awoke, the crusade would have advanced further. More worlds would fly the imperial banner. More of humanity's lost children would have been brought back into the fold. The Emperor's dream would be that much closer to reality. There might be setbacks along the way, but the trajectory was clear. Humanity was ascending, and he was privileged to play a role in that ascension. The relationships between Primarchs during this period were complex, but fundamentally rooted in brotherhood. Horus and Sanguinius were close friends, their mutual respect and affection evident to all who saw them together. Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus shared a bond that seemed unbreakable, the perfectionist and the craftsman finding common ground in their shared pursuit of excellence. Even those Primarchs who had more fractious relationships, like the rivalry between the lion and the wolf, were still bound by their shared purpose and loyalty to the Emperor. For the dreadnoughts who had witnessed these relationships firsthand, who had fought in campaigns where multiple legions worked in concert under their Primarch's joint command, the idea of these brothers turning on each other would have been literally unthinkable. It would be like imagining the stars suddenly falling from the sky or the laws of physics reversing themselves. Some things were simply impossible, and chief among them was the notion that a Primarch could betray the Emperor. This was the golden age that these ancient warriors carried with them into stasis. This was the reality they believed would continue in perpetuity. This was the dream they had given everything to defend. And this is what made the awakening to betrayal so utterly devastating. When they next opened their optical senses to perceive reality, they would find that dream had become a nightmare. The age of brotherhood had ended in the most terrible way imaginable, and they would have to find a way to continue existing in a universe where everything they believed in had been revealed as a lie. The awakening is always disorienting. The transition from the void of stasis to consciousness comes with a moment of pure confusion, a scrambling of circuits and synapses as the dreadnought systems power up and his organic brain reconnects with the mechanical chassis that has become his body. But the disorientation that greets a pre-heresy dreadnought, awakening to learn of the betrayal, goes far beyond the normal difficulties of transitioning between states of consciousness. Imagine the moment. You are ancient Theron, let us say, a dreadnought of the Emperor's Children Legion. You were interred 3 decades before the heresy, during a campaign against an orc invasion that left your body shattered but your mind intact. You remember the ceremony clearly, or as clearly as any memory can remain after decades of stasis. Fulgrim himself presided over your entombment, his perfect features showing genuine sorrow at your wounds, but also pride at your continued service. You remember his voice, melodious and commanding, telling you that you were honored above all others, that you would continue to serve the Legion in this new form, that your wisdom and experience would guide future generations. You went to sleep, knowing that you would wake to continue the fight. The Great Crusade would go on. Your brothers would need you again. And when that day came, you would rise from your tomb and once more walk among them, a monument to the Legion's glory and proof that even death itself could not stop the Emperor's children from pursuing perfection. The darkness takes you. Time passes, though you have no awareness of its passage. And then, with a sudden surge of power through your systems, consciousness returns. Your optical senses activate, painting the world in shades of green and grey as they calibrate. Your audio receptors come online, picking up the familiar sounds of a tech marine's chanting and the hum of machinery. Your weapon systems run through their diagnostic cycles, reporting optimal functionality. You are awake. You are whole. You are ready to serve. But something is wrong. You can sense it immediately, even before your full awareness has returned. The tech marine performing your activation is wearing power armor you do not recognize. The symbols etched into his warplate are familiar, but subtly different from what you remember. The prayers he chants have a darker edge to them, invocations that make your already cold amniotic fluid feel colder still. Your voxcaster crackles as you attempt to speak. Your first words in 3 decades emerge as a mechanical rasp. Brother, report. How long have I slept? The tech marine pauses in his work, his skull-faced helmet turning to regard your massive form. When he speaks, his voice is filtered through multiple layers of corruption you do not yet understand. Ancient One, you have slept for 83 years. Much has changed. The Legion requires your service once more. 83 years. The number hits you like a bolt around. You had expected months, perhaps a year or two, but 8 decades? Nearly a century has passed while you lay in darkness. You try to process this information, to understand what it means. An entire generation of Space Marines has been recruited, trained, and sent into battle in the time you have been dormant. The galaxy must be almost entirely compliant by now, the Great Crusade nearing its triumphant conclusion. But then why does everything feel so wrong? Why is there a taste like acid in your amniotic fluid? Why do the symbols on the Tech Marine's armor seem to writhe and twist when you look at them too closely? Where is the Primarch, you ask? You need to hear Fulgrim's voice, to receive your orders from the Gene Father you serve. That will orient you, ground you in purpose and certainty. The Tech Marine's laugh is like grinding metal. The Phoenician? Oh, Ancient One, you will see him soon enough. He has transcended, as have we all. He will be pleased to know you have returned to us. Transcended. The word should mean elevation, improvement, the achievement of a higher state. But the way the Tech Marine says, it makes your neural pathways crackle with warnings you cannot yet fully process. Something is fundamentally wrong here, but you lack the context to understand what. They brief you as they perform the final activation protocols. The news comes in fragments that do not cohere into any sensible whole. The Warmaster Horus has rebelled against the Emperor. The Imperial Palace on Terra has been besieged. Half the legions have turned traitor. Your own legion, the Emperor's children, stands with Horus against the Emperor. You do not believe them at first. You cannot believe them. It is so manifestly impossible that your mind refuses to accept the data your senses are providing. There must be some mistake, some corruption in your systems that is causing you to misinterpret what you are hearing. Horus, rebel against the Emperor. The notion is insane. Horus loved the Emperor more than life itself. The Emperor trusted Horus above all. His other sons elevated him to the rank of War Master, placed the entire Great Crusade under his command. Why would Horus, who had everything, who was destined to stand at the Emperor's right hand for all eternity, why would he throw that away? And your own Primarch, the perfect Fulgrim, the Gene Father, whose voice you can still hear in your memory, speaking of honor and duty and the pursuit of excellence in all things. How could he have betrayed the Emperor? It makes no sense. It contradicts everything you know about the universe. But then they show you. The evidence is incontrovertible. Battle reports from the drop site massacre at Istvan V, where the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Alpha Legion, and Wordbearers turned on their loyalist brothers and slaughtered them wholesale. Picked captures of the Siege of Terra, showing armies of traitor space marines led by twisted Primarchs assaulting the very heart of the Imperium. And most horrifying of all, images of what your own legion has become, the Emperor's children. You see in these recordings are not the warriors you remember. They have been transformed into something obscene, their pursuit of perfection perverted into a grotesque quest for sensation and excess. Their armor is decorated with profane symbols that hurt to look at. Their weapons produce sounds that should not exist in reality. Their faces, when helms are removed, show the marks of mutations that could only come from exposure to the warp's foulest depths. And then you see him, your Primarch, your gene father, the being whose words sustained you through your entombment and into the darkness of stasis. Fulgrim has become a monster, a demon prince of Slaanesh, whose form is an affront to everything you once believed about the purity and perfection of the Emperor's genetic engineering. He is beautiful in the way that poison is beautiful, terrible in the way that a fire consuming everything you love is terrible. When you hear his voice in the recordings, you can still detect the melodious tones that once commanded your absolute loyalty, but they have been twisted into something that makes your very soul recoil in horror. This is the moment when the full weight of the betrayal crashes down upon you. This is when you understand that you did not simply sleep through some minor political upheaval or tactical setback in the crusade. You slept through the death of everything you believed in. You went into stasis in an age of enlightenment and woke in an age of nightmare. The dream of a unified humanity ascending to take its rightful place among the stars has been shattered beyond all hope of repair. And the worst part, the part that makes your consciousness scream in anguish despite the mechanical filters that should prevent such emotional responses, is that you were not there. When your legion needed you most, when your Primarch walked the path to damnation, and perhaps could have been saved by the counsel of his oldest and most loyal sons, you were sleeping. You were not there to fight at Istvan III alongside the loyalists who tried to resist the betrayal. You were not there to add your voice to those who might have pulled the Legion back from the brink. You were not there to die with honor fighting against the corruption of your brothers. You survived, if this half-life can be called survival, but at what cost? You are a relic of a dead age, a monument to loyalties that no longer exist. The Legion you served is gone, transformed into something that bears its name but has none of its spirit. The Primarch you loved is a demon prince of chaos. The Emperor you would have died for lies interred upon the golden throne, neither living nor dead, sustained only by the sacrifice of thousands of psykers each day. Everything you were, everything you fought for, everything that made your sacrifice worthwhile has been revealed as built on foundations of sand. And now you must decide what to do with this knowledge. Do you continue to serve, despite the horror of what your legion has become? Do you seek out what remains of the loyalists and pledge yourself to them, becoming a renegade from your own genetic line? Do you simply shut down your systems and let the darkness take you one final time, choosing oblivion over existing in this nightmare reality? These are the questions that torment the minds of pre-heresy dreadnoughts who wake to discover their Primarch has turned traitor. And the answers they find will define not just their own fate, but the fate of those around them who must deal with these ancient warriors and the terrible burden of knowledge they carry. For some dreadnoughts, the psychological torment of discovering their Primarch's betrayal does not end with the initial shock of revelation. Instead, that moment becomes the beginning of a new and even more terrible existence, one that stretches across 10,000 years of unrelenting anguish. Consider the nature of a dreadnought's experience of time. Unlike a normal space marine, who ages slowly but still experiences the passage of years in a linear fashion, a dreadnought's consciousness skips across time like a stone across water. You might fight in a battle during 1 century, be put to sleep, and wake 300 years later. The intervening time simply does not exist for you. Your subjective experience compresses millennia into what feels like a series of brief awakening periods separated by periods of void. This means that for a pre-heresy dreadnought, the betrayal is always fresh. Every time you wake, you must confront it anew. The tech marines who perform your activation might have changed. The chapter serfs who maintain your chassis might be descendants separated by 50 generations from those you knew before. The very star systems you deploy to might have been renamed or repopulated multiple times. But the betrayal, the fundamental truth that your Primarch turned traitor and destroyed everything you believed in, that remains eternally immediate. There is no healing from this wound, because there is no time for healing. A normal person who experiences trauma can gradually process it, can find ways to integrate the painful knowledge into their understanding of the world and move forward. But a dreadnought experiences each awakening as if the betrayal happened only yesterday. The shock, the grief, the sense of loss and confusion, all of these assault the consciousness with the same intensity every single time awareness returns from the void. And it gets worse, much worse, because with each awakening, the organic portions of a dreadnought's brain deteriorate a little more. The memories that once sustained you, the clear recollections of brotherhood and purpose and certainty, these begin to fade. But the knowledge of betrayal, burned into your neural pathways through repetition and reinforcement, that remains sharp and clear. You begin to forget the faces of the brothers you served with during the Great Crusade, but you never forget that they turned traitor. You begin to lose the sound of your Primarch's voice as it was before the fall, but you can always recall with perfect clarity what he became. This creates a particular kind of hell. You become a being defined entirely by loss, by the absence of what once was. Your identity as a loyal son of a fallen legion becomes the core around which everything else revolves. You are not simply a dreadnought, a warrior serving the Emperor across the ages. You are a monument to betrayal, a living reminder that loyalty alone is not enough to prevent tragedy, that even gene-forged bonds of brotherhood can be shattered beyond all hope of repair. For some, this knowledge breeds a bitterness that never fades. Every awakening brings with it a renewed sense of anger at what was stolen from you. The Great Crusade that promised so much delivered only ashes and treachery. The Primarch who was supposed to be a model of virtue and strength proved to be as fallible as any mortal. The Emperor's vision of a unified humanity was revealed as impossible, perhaps even foolish. This bitterness can curdle into something darker, a nihilistic rage that sees the entire universe as corrupt and worthless. Others find in the betrayal a twisted source of purpose. If their Primarch turned traitor, then perhaps the only meaning to be found is in opposition to what he represents. These dreadnoughts become zealots of loyalty, serving the Emperor with a fervor that borders on madness. They cannot undo the betrayal, cannot restore what was lost, but they can spend every moment of their continued existence fighting against chaos in all its forms. Every traitor they destroy is a small victory against the darkness that consumed their legion. Every battle they survive is another moment where they prove that loyalty still means something. The isolation compounds the torment. A dreadnought cannot truly connect with the younger Space Marines who serve around him. They were not there. They did not experience the Great Crusade, did not know the Primarchs before their fall, did not understand what was lost when half the legions turned traitor. To these younger warriors, the Horus Heresy is ancient history, stories told in the chapter's halls, but lacking the immediate reality that defines every moment of the dreadnought's existence. Imagine trying to explain to someone who has only ever known the grim darkness of the 41st millennium what it was like when the Imperium was young and full of hope. How do you convey the feeling of certainty, of knowing with absolute conviction that you were building something that would endure for all time? How do you describe the brotherhood between legions, when all that remains are successor chapters that sometimes barely acknowledge their common heritage? How do you make someone understand the magnitude of the betrayal when they have never known a universe where such betrayal seemed impossible? You cannot. The gap is too wide, the context too alien. So you remain silent, or you speak in riddles that only another ancient would understand. Or you simply accept that your experience of reality is fundamentally different from those around you. You become a ghost haunting your own existence, present in body, but separated in spirit from everyone and everything. Some dreadnoughts, confronted with this unbearable isolation, begin to seek out others like themselves. Across the Imperium, scattered through various chapters, and still loyal remnants of the original legions, there are other pre-heresy ancients who carry the same burden. Finding them becomes a kind of quest, a search for someone, anyone, who can truly understand what you have experienced. When such meetings occur, they are profound beyond the ability of any outsider to comprehend. Two ancients, each bearing 10,000 years of memory and grief, finally able to speak with someone who understands without explanation. They share stories of the world that was, memories of battles fought alongside Primarchs who still retained their nobility, reflections on what it means to serve loyally, when loyalty itself has been revealed as insufficient protection against corruption. These meetings are brief, for the duties of each dreadnought usually call them back to their respective chapters. But the knowledge that they are not alone, that somewhere in the vastness of the Imperium there are others who remember, who carry the same impossible weight, provides a small measure of comfort. It does not heal the wound. Nothing can heal the wound. But it reminds them that the burden of memory is worth carrying, that the truth of what happened must be preserved even if it brings only pain. And yet, despite the torment, despite the isolation and the endless cycle of awakening to fresh grief, most of these dreadnoughts continue. They endure because that is what they were created to do, what they chose to do when they accepted interment. The alternative is to shut down, to let the systems fail and finally embrace true death. Some do choose this path, cannot bear one more awakening to the nightmare reality. But most soldier on, finding in their suffering a kind of meaning, a testament to the strength of the human spirit, even when that spirit has been reduced to a ghost in a machine. They fight on because someone must remember, because the young must be warned that even the greatest can fall, because the emperor still reigns from his golden throne and still requires the service of his warriors, no matter how broken they may be, because loyalty is not simply about receiving rewards or achieving victory, but about maintaining faith even when that faith has been tested beyond all reasonable endurance. This is the weight of 10 millennia carried by those who cannot forget, who wake again and again to face the same truth, who must find a way to continue existing in a universe that has proven itself to be far darker and more terrible than they ever imagined during the golden age of the Great Crusade. Among all the pre-heresy dreadnoughts who have endured into the dark millennium, one name stands above all others. Bjorn the Fell-Handed, the oldest loyal space marine in the entire Imperium, has carried the burden of memory longer than any other. His story illuminates what it means to witness betrayal, to survive it, and to somehow find purpose in the ashes of everything you once believed. Bjorn was not always the legendary figure he has become. During the Great Crusade, he was simply a warrior of the 6th Legion, the Space Wolves, serving in the company directly under the command of Leman Russ himself. He was competent, skilled, brave, all the things a Space Marine should be, but not particularly distinguished from thousands of other warriors. His first notable action was actually a mistake, shooting down a Remembrancer's shuttle in error and then being assigned to protect the man as a form of informal punishment. But it was during the dark days of the Horus Heresy that Bjorn truly distinguished himself. He was present at Prospero when the Space Wolves were unleashed against Magnus the Red and the Thousand Suns. He fought through the burning streets of Tizca, witnessed the horrors of sorcery unleashed without restraint, and saw firsthand what happened when a legion fell to chaos. It was during this campaign that he lost his hand, torn away by the machinations of the warp, earning him the epithet Fell-Handed that would stay with him for all the millennia to come. Bjorn understood the betrayal in a way that few others could. He had fought alongside other legions during the Great Crusade, had shared victory feasts, and swapped battle stories with warriors who would later turn traitor. He knew Thousand Suns who were loyal servants of the Emperor before Magnus's arrogance and the machinations of chaos brought their legion low. He had broken bread with Death Guard, World Eaters, Emperor's Children, all of whom would become bitter enemies before the heresy was done. But more importantly, Bjorn was there for the greatest betrayal of all, the disappearance of Leman Russ. After the heresy ended and the Imperium began the long process of rebuilding, Russ became increasingly withdrawn, haunted by his role in the destruction of Prospero and the realization that he had been manipulated by the very chaos forces he despised. Then, in a moment that would define the Space Wolves for all time to come, Russ gathered his most trusted warriors and departed for the Eye of Terror, leaving behind only cryptic words about seeking forgiveness and making amends. Bjorn was not among those chosen to accompany his Primarch. He was left behind with the rest of the Legion, appointed to lead them in Russ's absence. This abandonment, for abandonment is what it felt like despite all the rationalizations and explanations offered afterward, cut Bjorn deeper than any weapon ever had. He had given everything in service to his Primarch, had sacrificed his very humanity by accepting interment in a Dreadnought chassis. And for what? To be left behind without explanation, to watch helplessly as the being he loved more than life itself walked away and never returned. This is what separates Bjorn's experience from that of pre-Heresy Dreadnoughts from Traitor legions. His Primarch did not fall to chaos, did not become a demon prince or lead his legion into damnation. But Russ still left. The outcome was different in the specifics, but similar in the fundamental sense of loss and abandonment. Whether your Primarch betrays the Emperor or simply disappears, the result is the same. You are alone, carrying a burden that should have been shared, forced to find meaning in service without the certainty that your Gene Father's vision will guide you. Bjorn served as the first Great Wolf, the chapter master of the Space Wolves, for decades after Russ's departure. He led the Legion through the difficult years of the Second Founding, when the Space Marine Legions were broken up into smaller chapters. He guided them through the early centuries of the long war against chaos. And then, inevitably, his body finally failed him. Mortally wounded during a raid on a fortress during the Proxima Rebellion, Bjorn's shattered form was interred within a Dreadnought chassis, beginning a new phase of his long service. That was nearly 10,000 years ago. Since then, Bjorn has awakened from stasis hundreds of times, each time to find the Imperium more decayed, the Space Wolves more distant from the warriors who followed Russ during the Great Crusade, the galaxy darker and more desperate. He has watched the slow entropy of everything the Emperor tried to build. He has seen countless brave warriors die in wars that accomplish nothing except maintaining a fragile status quo against an infinity of horrors pressing in from all sides. The psychological toll of this existence on Bjorn cannot be overstated. With each awakening, he must confront anew the reality that Russ has not returned, that the hope of his Primarch's return remains unfulfilled. He must face younger Space Wolves who see him as a figure of legend rather than the flawed, bitter, angry warrior he actually is. He must pretend to find meaning and purpose in endless warfare that accomplishes nothing except delaying the inevitable fall of the Imperium. Bjorn's survival strategy has been to cultivate a persona of gruff indifference, to pretend that the centuries of service have not left him scarred beyond measure. When younger Space Wolves wake him to hear stories of Leman Russ and the glory days of the Great Crusade, he tells them what they want to hear, carefully omitting the parts that would shatter their faith. He plays the role of the wise ancient, the living link to the past, even though privately he wishes desperately that they would simply let him sleep and never wake him again. This facade serves multiple purposes. It protects the younger Space Wolves from the crushing weight of the truth that even the most loyal service, even the most perfect dedication, is not enough to prevent loss and failure. It protects the chapter from the corrosive effects of his bitterness, preventing his anger and disappointment from poisoning the morale of warriors who need to believe that their sacrifices matter. And it protects Bjorn himself from having to fully confront the meaninglessness of his continued existence. But there are moments when the facade slips, when the weight becomes too great to bear. The First War of Armageddon, where Bjorn faced Magnus the Red in single combat, was one such moment. Coming face to face with the demon Primarch, remembering Prospero and everything that followed, Bjorn felt the full force of his accumulated grief and rage. Though he could not slay Magnus, though the battle ended with the demon's retreat rather than true victory, Bjorn at least had the satisfaction of causing Magnus genuine pain, of proving that loyalty and determination could stand against the power of chaos, even if they could not permanently defeat it. These rare moments of genuine purpose, where his service seems to actually accomplish something meaningful rather than simply delaying the inevitable, are what sustain Bjorn through the long ages. They are few and far between, separated by centuries of routine deployments and battles that blur together into an endless tapestry of violence. But they are enough. Barely enough, but enough nonetheless. Bjorn's story teaches us something crucial about what it means to be a pre-heresy dreadnought who has witnessed betrayal and loss. It is not about maintaining unshakable faith or finding easy answers to impossible questions. It is about enduring, about continuing to serve even when service seems pointless, about protecting the truth you carry even as you carefully ration what parts of that truth you share with others, about finding tiny moments of meaning in an existence that threatens at every moment to collapse into nihilistic despair. The Bjorn who fought alongside Leman Russ during the Great Crusade would barely recognize the Bjorn who awakens in the 41st millennium. 10,000 years of service, of loss, of watching everything he believed in slowly decay, have transformed him into something he never intended to become. He is not the hero the Space Wolves believe him to be. He is simply an ancient warrior who refuses to quit, who continues putting one foot in front of the other, not because he believes in ultimate victory, but because stopping would mean admitting that everything he has endured was for nothing. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. Heroism in the grim darkness of the far future is not about grand gestures or dramatic victories. It is about enduring when endurance seems impossible. It is about maintaining your duty when you have long since forgotten why that duty ever mattered. It is about continuing to fight, not because you believe you will win, but because the alternative is surrender to the darkness that consumed half your brothers 10,000 years ago. Bjorn the Fell-Handed endures. And in that endurance, he gives testimony to the strength of loyalty, even when that loyalty has been tested beyond all reasonable measure. His existence is a torch in the darkness, not bright enough to illuminate the way forward, but sufficient to prove that some lights refuse to be extinguished, no matter how strong the wind that seeks to blow them out. If Bjorn represents the endurance of loyalty despite abandonment, then ancient Rillanor represents something else entirely, the terrible price of remaining loyal to principles when your gene father has abandoned them utterly. His story is one of the most haunting in all the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, a tale of devotion transformed into its opposite, of love curdling into hate, and of a single warrior's absolute refusal to bend even when bending would end 10,000 years of suffering. Rillanor was ancient before the Horus heresy even began. He fought beside the Emperor himself during the Unification Wars on Terra, one of the original Terran-born Emperor's children before Fulgrim was even discovered. He bore honors won at Roma and Thula, battles that were already legend when most of the Primarchs were still being reunited with their legions. When Fulgrim finally took command of his legion, Rillanor was the first Space Marine to bear the Palatine Aquila into battle, the honored symbol of the Emperor's favor that the 3rd Legion alone was permitted to wear. He was interred in a Contemptor-patterned dreadnought, decades before the heresy, his body broken in battle against the Aeldari, but his spirit deemed too valuable to lose. As the Ancient of Rites, he presided over the Legion's ceremonies and inductions, a living embodiment of the Emperor's children's traditions and values. He was not simply a warrior, but a guardian of the Legion's soul, the keeper of its history, and the embodiment of everything it was supposed to represent. By the time of the heresy's opening moves, Rillanor had become increasingly troubled by changes he observed in his legion. The campaign on Laeran, where the Emperor's children recovered a Xenos sword that would ultimately doom Fulgrim, marked a turning point. The Legion's pursuit of perfection began to twist into something darker, something that felt wrong to a warrior who had served since the earliest days of the Imperium. But Rylanor was a dreadnought. His protests filtered through layers of mechanical translation, easy to dismiss as the conservatism of the old and the inability to adapt to new circumstances. When the betrayal at Istvan III was planned, Fulgrim personally ensured that Rylanor would be among those deployed to the surface. The Primarch knew his Ancient of Rights would never willingly turn traitor, that Rylanor's loyalty to the Emperor was absolute and unshakable. So Rylanor was marked for death, sent to the surface with the other loyalists to be purged in Horus's virus bombardment and subsequent slaughter. But Rylanor survived the initial virus bombing, his dreadnought chassis protecting him from the plague that killed billions. He fought alongside Captain Sol Tarvitz and the other loyalists in the ruins of the Choral City, becoming a rallying point for Emperor's children who refused to follow their gene-father into damnation. His mere presence on the battlefield was enough to inspire warriors who were outnumbered and outgunned, who knew they were fighting a losing battle, but chose to fight anyway, because some things are worth dying for. For 3 months, the Loyalists held out in the ruins of Istvan III. 3 months of brutal urban combat, of brother fighting brother, of watching comrades who had served together for decades trying to kill each other. Through it all, Rylanor endured, his weapons systems never cooling, his voxcasters broadcasting messages of defiance, even as the traitor forces closed in around them. Then came the final bombardment. Horus, tired of the Loyalists' stubborn resistance, ordered a complete orbital strike on the ruins of the Choral City. Entire districts were vaporized in seconds. Radioactive fire consumed everything that still lived. The few remaining Loyalists were buried under countless tons of rubble and slag. Rylanor should have died there. By all logic, by every reasonable calculation, he should have been destroyed along with everyone else. But fate, cruel and relentless, had other plans. Rylanor's dreadnought chassis was crushed but not destroyed, buried deep beneath the ruins. Critically damaged but still functional. His leg servos were shattered, leaving him immobile. His weapons systems were damaged beyond immediate repair. His communication equipment was destroyed, cutting him off from any possibility of rescue. He was alone, buried alive beneath a dead world, in darkness so complete that even his optical sensors could barely function. No contact with the outside universe, no hope of rescue, no reason to believe that anyone even knew he had survived. Just silence, darkness, and the slow deterioration of his life support systems as they struggled to keep the fragments of his organic body alive within the sarcophagus. This is where most warriors would have simply shut down, would have chosen to let their systems fail and embrace the true death that had been denied them at Istvan III. But Rylanor was not most warriors. He was a space marine who had fought beside the Emperor himself, who had carried the Palatine Aquila with pride, who had served as the conscience of his legion when it needed such service most. And he was consumed by something that burned hotter than any plasma weapon, fiercer than any hatred he had ever felt for Xenos or traitors. He was consumed by rage at his Primarch, at Fulgrim, who had thrown away everything the Legion stood for in pursuit of sensation and excess, at the Gene-Father who had betrayed not just the Emperor, but every warrior who had ever worn the purple and gold of the Third Legion, at the Demon Prince who had murdered Ferrus Manus, his closest friend, and felt nothing but satisfaction at the deed. This rage sustained Rylanor through 10,000 years of isolation. Think about that. 10 millennia of lying crippled in the darkness, conscious but unable to move, aware but cut off from all outside contact. The life support systems of his dreadnought, designed to preserve him for centuries between battles, gradually failed. The amniotic fluid that kept his organic components alive became brackish and foul. His neural connections degraded, causing pain that would have driven a mortal insane. His memories faded, worn away by the relentless passage of time, until he could barely remember his own name or the names of the brothers who had died beside him at Istvan III. But he never forgot why he was still alive. He never forgot his purpose. Because during those 10,000 years, Rillanor had been working, with infinite patience, with the determination that comes from having literally nothing else to occupy your consciousness. He had been building a trap, using the broken pieces of his weapon systems, scavenged components from destroyed equipment, and most crucially, a virus bomb that had failed to detonate during the final bombardment. Rillanor constructed a lure specifically designed to draw Fulgrim back to Istvan III. It took millennia. The work could only proceed in tiny increments, limited by his immobility and his failing systems. But eventually, Rillanor completed his masterpiece, a psychic beacon that broadcast a simple message across the warp. The Ancient awaits. The beacon was not just a call, but a challenge, a taunt specifically calibrated to prick Fulgrim's massive ego. Rillanor knew his Gene Father well, enough to understand that the Primarch, now a demon prince, would not be able to resist the lure of a surviving loyalist from the old legion. The chance to gloat, to demonstrate his power and superiority, to try to corrupt one of the most stalwart defenders of the old ideals, would be irresistible. And so, Rillanor waited. Having spent 10,000 years preparing his trap, he waited for his prey to come to him. The beacon did indeed attract attention. First came 3,000 Suns sorcerers, drawn by curiosity about what could be broadcasting such a message from a dead world. They found Rillanor in his collapsed hangar, his Dreadnought chassis so corroded and damaged that they initially thought him long dead. When Rillanor awakened at their approach, when his corroded vox speakers crackled to life, with a voice so degraded that it was barely recognizable as human, he greeted them with calm acceptance. They were not his true target, but they would serve as witnesses to what was to come. He held one of them hostage, not to kill them, but to keep them present for what he knew would follow. And then Fulgrim arrived. The demon prince materialized from the shadows, beautiful and terrible, his serpentine form a mockery of the perfection he had once pursued. He looked upon Rillanor's broken chassis and laughed, a sound that held genuine amusement mixed with something that might almost have been affection. Here was one of his oldest sons, a relic from the very beginning of the Legion, still clinging to outmoded notions of loyalty and duty. Fulgrim made Rillanor an offer. He could restore him, could give him a new body of flesh that would surpass even the perfection of a space marine. He could show Rillanor pleasures and sensations beyond anything possible in his current state. All Rillanor had to do was acknowledge Fulgrim as his rightful lord and master, accept the blessings of Slaanesh, and join the Emperor's children in their eternal pursuit of experience. Rillanor's response has echoed across 10,000 years, preserved in chapter records and sung in battle hymns. Through his corroded vox speakers, with every ounce of contempt his mechanical voice could convey, he rejected his Gene Father absolutely. I am Rillanor of the Emperor's children, ancient of rights, venerable of the Palatine host, and proud servant of the Emperor of mankind, beloved by all. I reject you now and always. With those words, he triggered the virus bomb. The weapon that had failed to detonate during the original bombardment of Istvan III finally activated, unleashing its lethal payload in an explosion designed to consume everything in the immediate vicinity. Fulgrim's reaction was instant, using his daemonic powers to contain the blast, preventing it from touching him while the 1,000 Suns sorcerers were consumed by the very plague that had killed their world. But something unexpected happened in that moment. One of the 1,000 Suns, the sorcerer named Vistario, was so moved by Rillanор's absolute conviction and his willingness to die rather than accept corruption that he experienced something Chaos Space Marines are not supposed to experience, a moment of genuine redemption. In the seconds before the virus consumed him, Vistario used his sorceress powers to ensure that Rillanor would not die alone, that his sacrifice would not be in vain. He extended the reach of the virus bomb, forcing Fulgrim to expend enormous amounts of power to protect himself. Rillanor died in that hangar on Istvan III, finally granted the true death that had been denied him for 10 millennia. His last conscious thought was satisfaction. The grim pleasure of knowing that even if he could not kill his fallen gene-father, he had at least hurt him. He had forced Fulgrim to acknowledge him, to spend power defending against a crippled Dreadnought's final act of defiance. And more than that, he had proven something crucial. That loyalty to the Emperor and his ideals was not simply naive idealism, but a force powerful enough to redeem even a Chaos sorcerer in the final moments of his life. The psychological profile of Rillanor reveals something profound about what happens to a pre-Heresy Dreadnought who witnesses his Primarch's betrayal. Unlike Bjorn, who maintained his sanity through service and by carefully avoiding full confrontation with the meaninglessness of his existence, Rillanor embraced his hatred and let it define him completely. For 10,000 years, he was sustained not by hope or faith or belief in ultimate victory, but by pure, distilled hatred for the being who had betrayed everything he stood for. This is not a healthy way to exist. It is not the path anyone would choose if other options were available. The Rillanor, who died on Istvan III, had been reduced to almost nothing, a ghost in a machine sustained only by the burning need for revenge. He had forgotten his name at one point, forgotten the faces of his battle brothers, forgotten almost everything about himself, except that he had been betrayed and that betrayal demanded redress. But unhealthy or not, it worked. Rillanor endured. He survived 10,000 years of isolation that would have driven any normal consciousness insane. He constructed his trap with infinite patience, and when the moment came, he struck with all the fury that 10 millennia of hatred could provide. He may not have killed his target, but he wounded Fulgrim in a way that mere physical weapons never could, forcing the Demon Prince to acknowledge the power of loyalty and the strength of the human spirit even in its most degraded form. The story of ancient Rillanor is not a happy one. There is no redemption here, no miraculous salvation, no reward for his suffering beyond the satisfaction of defiance. But it is a story that matters, that needs to be told, because it demonstrates a crucial truth about the Warhammer 40,000 universe. That even in the grim darkness of the far future, even after 10,000 years of suffering and isolation, the human spirit can still choose to spit in the face of chaos rather than submit to it. And for a pre-Heresy Dreadnought, who has witnessed his Primarch's betrayal, that choice, that absolute refusal to accept corruption no matter the cost, may be the only meaning left to find in an existence that has been stripped of everything else that once made it worthwhile. Beyond the specific stories of individuals like Bjorn and Rillanor lies a more fundamental question. What does it do to the mind when a pre-Heresy Dreadnought discovers his Primarch has turned traitor? To answer this, we must delve into the unique psychology of these ancient warriors and understand how betrayal affects consciousness that exists in a state between life and death. The mental architecture of a Dreadnought is fundamentally different from that of a normal human or even a regular space marine. The process of interment creates what might be called a hybrid consciousness, part organic brain and part machine intelligence. The neural interfaces that connect the pilot to his chassis don't simply allow him to control the Dreadnought. They fundamentally alter how he experiences reality and processes information. A normal person's sense of self is anchored in their physical body. You know who you are because you can feel your heartbeat, sense the weight of your limbs, experience the world through sensory organs that have been yours since birth. A Dreadnought has none of these anchors. His body is a shell of metal and ceramite that bears no resemblance to the form he was born with. His sensory apparatus translates reality into data streams that his organic brain must interpret through layers of machine cognition. Even his thoughts are filtered through computer systems that process and categorize them according to tactical priorities and threat assessment protocols. This creates a kind of identity crisis that exists at the most fundamental level. Am I the human consciousness piloting this machine, or am I the machine inhabited by a human consciousness? Where does the organic end and the mechanical begin? These questions have no clear answers, Because the truth is that a dreadnought is neither and both simultaneously, a fusion of flesh and steel that defies easy categorization. For a pre-heresy dreadnought, the discovery of his Primarch's betrayal attacks this already fragile sense of identity at its core. The Primarch is not just a military commander or a political leader. He is the genetic father, the source of the gene seed that transforms a normal human into a space marine. The connection between a space marine and his Primarch is literally biological, written into every cell of his body. To discover that this genetic father has betrayed everything you stand for is to call into question your own fundamental nature. If the Primarch who shaped you, whose genetic legacy runs through your veins, could fall to chaos, what does that say about you? Are you also corrupted at some level you cannot perceive? Is the loyalty you feel toward the Emperor simply a less developed form of the same impulses that led your gene father to betrayal? Can you trust your own thoughts and feelings when they arise from a genetic heritage that has proven itself capable of ultimate treachery? These questions are poisonous to a stable sense of self. They create a paranoia that cannot be reasoned away because it is rooted in biological fact. Your genes do come from a traitor Primarch. That is an immutable truth. And while you might argue that genetics do not determine destiny, that you have the free will to choose loyalty regardless of your genetic heritage, the fact remains that your existence is fundamentally tied to a being who made the opposite choice. For a dreadnought, this crisis of identity is compounded by the mechanical aspects of his existence. The machine components of his consciousness, the tactical subroutines and targeting protocols. These do not experience loyalty or betrayal. They simply function according to their programming. But the organic components, the parts that still remember what it meant to be human, these are vulnerable to every form of psychological torment that the betrayal can inflict. The result is a kind of cognitive dissonance that exists at every moment of consciousness. The machine parts of you want to continue functioning, to optimize for survival and tactical effectiveness. The human parts of you are screaming in anguish at the betrayal, grieving for what was lost, struggling with questions of identity and purpose that have no good answers. These two aspects of your consciousness are in constant tension, pulling you in different directions, creating a state of perpetual internal conflict that can never be fully resolved. Some dreadnoughts respond to this tension by allowing the machine components to dominate. They gradually suppress the human aspects of their consciousness, becoming more like sophisticated war machines that happen to contain organic components rather than humans who happen to be housed in mechanical bodies. This is a form of self-protection, a way of avoiding the pain of full consciousness by retreating into the cold clarity of tactical thinking and strategic calculation. But this solution comes with its own costs. To suppress your humanity is to surrender what remains of your original identity. You become exactly what you feared, a weapon that can think but no longer truly feels. The organic components of your brain continue to exist, but they are subordinated to the mechanical aspects to such a degree that you are effectively a different being than the warrior who was first interred. Other dreadnoughts go in the opposite direction, clinging desperately to their humanity, even as it causes them infinite pain. They refuse to let the machine components dominate, insisting on maintaining emotional responses and personal connections, even when these become sources of suffering. They force themselves to remember not just the tactical details of battles fought, but the names and faces of brothers who died in those battles. They maintain grudges, nurse grievances, experience rage and sorrow, and all the other emotions that the machine components of their consciousness would classify as tactically inefficient. This approach preserves identity at the cost of stability. A dreadnought who insists on feeling everything, on processing the full emotional weight of 10,000 years of loss and betrayal, is walking a razor's edge between sanity and madness. Every awakening brings fresh trauma. Every deployment reminds them of what they have lost. Every moment of consciousness is a struggle against the void of despair that threatens to consume them entirely. The betrayal of a Primarch adds an extra dimension to this struggle because it introduces an element of moral ambiguity that is almost impossible to process. During the Great Crusade, right and wrong were clear. You served the Emperor, fought his enemies, brought enlightenment to the benighted corners of the galaxy. Your purpose was obvious, and your methods justified by that purpose. But after the betrayal, especially after learning about the specific circumstances that led various Primarchs to turn traitor, the moral landscape becomes far more complicated. Was Magnus the Red truly a traitor, or was he a loyal son destroyed by the Emperor's own policies and the machinations of his enemies? Did Mortarion turn to chaos out of malice, or was he driven to it by desperation and a sense of betrayal by the Emperor he served? Was Fulgrim corrupted by a demon sword, meaning his fall was not truly his own choice? These questions have no simple answers, and for a Dreadnought trying to maintain his sanity and sense of purpose, the lack of clear answers is torture. If your Primarch was genuinely evil, if he turned traitor simply because he wanted power, or was always secretly corrupt, that is something you can process. You can tell yourself that you were deceived, that the being you served was not who you thought he was, and that your loyalty was to the idea of the Primarch rather than the reality. But if your Primarch was driven to betrayal by circumstances, by the Emperor's own mistakes or the manipulations of chaos, then what does that make you? Are you loyal to the Emperor who helped create the conditions that led to betrayal? Or are you loyal to the memory of your Primarch before his fall? These philosophical and moral questions cannot be answered satisfactorily, but they also cannot be ignored. They gnaw at the consciousness of a pre-heresy Dreadnought, like acid eating through armor plate. Every awakening brings them back with fresh intensity. Every deployment forces you to make choices that have moral implications you cannot fully work through. Every moment of reflection opens up new avenues of doubt and uncertainty that chip away at whatever foundation of meaning you have managed to construct. Some Dreadnoughts eventually reach a breaking point where the psychological stress becomes too much to bear. Their organic brains simply cannot sustain the level of cognitive dissonance and moral ambiguity that their existence demands. When this happens, the result is usually either a complete shutdown of consciousness or a descent into a form of madness that makes the Dreadnought too dangerous to wake again. But most endure. They find ways to compartmentalize, to focus on immediate tactical concerns rather than abstract philosophical questions. They construct narratives that allow them to maintain a sense of purpose, even when that purpose seems arbitrary or futile. They accept that they will never have satisfying answers to the questions that torment them and learn to function despite that lack of resolution. This is the true horror of being a pre-heresy Dreadnought who has witnessed his Primarch's betrayal. It is not just the physical suffering or the isolation or even the endless cycle of awakening to fresh trauma. It is the psychological torment of existing in a state where every fundamental question about your identity, your purpose, and your place in the universe has been rendered unanswerable by the betrayal of the being who should have been your ultimate source of certainty and guidance. And yet they endure. Somehow, despite everything, they continue to serve. That endurance in the face of unbearable psychological stress is perhaps the truest test of loyalty that the universe can devise. When a pre-heresy Dreadnought continues to fight for the Emperor despite having every reason to give up, despite having witnessed the betrayal of his gene-father and the collapse of everything he believed in, he demonstrates a form of strength that transcends genetics or programming. He proves that the human spirit, even when reduced to a fragment of organic tissue suspended in amniotic fluid and filtered through layers of machine intelligence, can still choose loyalty when every rational calculation suggests that loyalty is foolish. This is what it means, at the deepest psychological level, to be a pre-heresy Dreadnought who has learned his Primarch turned traitor. It means existing in a state of perpetual crisis, finding ways to continue when continuation seems impossible, and somehow maintaining enough coherence of self to still be called by your name even after 10,000 years of this existence. Among all the torments that afflict a pre-heresy dreadnought who has discovered his Primarch's betrayal, perhaps none is more visceral and immediate than the moment when he must face his former brothers in battle. To understand the full horror of this experience, we must recognize that brotherhood among Space Marines is not simply camaraderie or friendship in the way normal humans experience these things. It is something far deeper, forged through shared genetic heritage, decades of training and combat, and bonds of loyalty that are literally reinforced at the neurological level. During the Great Crusade, when legions fought alongside each other toward a common goal, Space Marines from different legions developed relationships that transcended normal human bonds. You might fight beside a warrior of the Emperor's Children during one campaign, share victory feasts with Death Guard during another, and coordinate tactical maneuvers with Iron Warriors during a third. These were not casual acquaintances. They were brothers in the fullest sense, warriors who would trust each other with their lives without hesitation. For a dreadnought, these memories carry even more weight because they are often among the most intact recollections from before interment. A warrior remembers the name of the World Eater who saved his life at Ullanor, can still recall the sound of laughter from Thousand Suns during a celebration after taking a particularly difficult fortress, holds in his memory banks the tactical brilliance of a Night Lord's ambush that turned certain defeat into glorious victory. When such a dreadnought awakens to discover that half the legions have turned traitor, the first instinct is denial. Surely not that World Eater who showed such honor in battle. Surely not those Thousand Suns who spoke so passionately about using knowledge to uplift humanity. Surely not the Iron Warriors whose dedication to the Emperor's vision seemed absolute. But the evidence is incontrovertible. They did turn. All of them. The warriors you trusted with your life became enemies. The first time a pre-heresy dreadnought faces traitor Space Marines in battle, there is a moment of profound disorientation that goes beyond anything his combat training prepared him for. His optical sensors track enemy units. His targeting systems designate them as hostiles. His tactical subroutines calculate optimal firing solutions. But his organic brain, the part that still remembers being human, screams in protest at the fundamental wrongness of what is happening. These should not be enemies. They are wearing the wrong symbols, carrying corrupted weaponry, fighting under banners that represent everything you oppose. But they are still your brothers. You can see it in how they move, recognize patterns of tactical behavior that were drilled into all Space Marines regardless of legion. When they speak, their voices are distorted by corruption, but still recognizable beneath the changes. And in some cases, you actually know them, can remember specific conversations and shared experiences with these particular warriors before everything went wrong. What do you do in such a moment? Your duty is clear. Destroy the enemy. These are traitors who have betrayed the Emperor and must be eliminated. But your heart, if that term still applies to whatever organic components remain of your emotional center, rebels against this necessity. These were brothers. They fought beside you. You owe them the loyalty that brothers owe each other, but they are also traitors. They have chosen chaos over the Emperor. They are corrupted in ways that make redemption impossible. If you show mercy, if you hesitate, you will fail in your duty and likely be destroyed yourself. There is no middle ground here, no compromise position that preserves both loyalty to the Emperor and loyalty to the memory of brotherhood. Most dreadnoughts resolve this conflict by compartmentalizing brutally. They separate the warriors before them from the memories they carry of those warriors. The thing wearing the armor of the World Eater you once knew is not actually that warrior. It is a corrupted shell, a demon inhabiting flesh that once belonged to a brother. The real warrior died when he fell to chaos. What remains is just an enemy that happens to bear a familiar face. This rationalization allows the Dreadnought to function in combat, to fire his weapons and destroy his targets without freezing up due to emotional conflict. But it comes at a cost. Every time you tell yourself that these are not really your brothers, that the true warriors died when they fell and what remains are just shells, you lose a little more of your own humanity. You train yourself to not feel, to not remember, to not let emotional bonds interfere with tactical necessity. Over time, this can transform a Dreadnought into something cold and remorseless, a being that processes other Space Marines as little more than tactical assets or threats depending on their loyalty status. The organic capacity for forming emotional bonds, for recognizing others as individuals, rather than simply units on a tactical display, atrophies through repeated suppression. And once lost, it is extremely difficult to regain, but some Dreadnoughts refuse to take that path. They insist on feeling the full weight of what they are doing when they fight their former brothers. Every shot fired is acknowledged as the death of someone who should have been an ally. Every battle is mourned as another fracture in the brotherhood that was supposed to be eternal. These warriors carry the weight of every kill, adding each one to an already unbearable load of grief and guilt. This approach preserves their humanity, but at the cost of their psychological stability. How many times can you kill someone you remember as a brother before the cumulative trauma breaks you? How long can you maintain the mental distinction between what your duty requires and what your heart protests before the dissonance tears your consciousness apart? There is no good answer to these questions. Both approaches lead to different forms of damage, different ways in which the necessary act of fighting former brothers corrodes the warrior's sense of self. The Dreadnought who compartmentalizes becomes cold and mechanical, losing touch with the human emotions that once motivated his service. The Dreadnought who refuses to compartmentalize eventually drowns in grief and guilt, unable to continue functioning under the accumulated weight of so much death and betrayal. And then there are the moments of recognition. When a Pre-Heresy Dreadnought faces an enemy he actually knows by name, who he remembers from specific campaigns during the Great Crusade. Perhaps this is a Death Guard captain who once shared tactical insights about siege warfare, or a word-bearer chaplain who led prayers before battle, or an Iron Warrior who collaborated on fortification designs during joint campaigns. These moments are the worst, because now it is not just the memory of brotherhood in abstract, but the specific reality of destroying someone you know as an individual. You can remember their voice, their manner of speech, their particular quirks and habits. And now you are tracking them with your weapon systems, calculating how best to kill them before they kill you. Sometimes the recognition is mutual. The Traitor Space Marine sees your insignia, recognizes which Dreadnought you are, and remembers fighting beside you during better days. They might call out to you, try to convince you to join them, or at least spare them for the sake of what you once shared. They might mock you for remaining loyal to an emperor who abandoned his sons. They might simply express sadness at what necessity has forced both of you to become. How do you respond to such moments? There is no training for this, no tactical manual that explains how to handle a situation where your enemy is trying to remind you that you once shared brotherhood. Do you shut off your audio receptors, refuse to listen to words that might make you hesitate? Do you respond, trying to convince them to repent and turn back to the Emperor's light? Do you simply fire your weapons and end the conversation before it can do more damage to your already strained psychology? Each choice has consequences. Refusing to engage means potentially missing an opportunity to redeem a fallen brother, but engaging opens you up to manipulation and emotional trauma. Trying to convince them to repent means acknowledging that part of you still sees them as brothers worth saving. But the inevitable failure when they refuse creates fresh grief. Firing immediately spares you the emotional conflict, but requires you to accept that you have become the kind of warrior who can kill brothers without even the courtesy of a conversation first. There are no good options. Every choice leads to pain. And this is the reality that Pre-Heresy Dreadnoughts face every time they deploy against traitor forces. They are not simply fighting enemies. They are being forced to destroy their own past, to eliminate the very warriors with whom they once shared the brotherhood of the Great Crusade. The psychological toll of this accumulated trauma is staggering. After thousands of years, after hundreds or thousands of deployments against traitor forces, a pre-heresy Dreadnought carries within his consciousness the ghosts of all the brothers he has killed. Their faces, when he can still remember them, haunt his moments of awareness. Their words echo through his neural pathways. The weight of all that death, all that betrayal both given and received, presses down on his consciousness like the gravity of a black hole, threatening at every moment to collapse him into complete psychological breakdown. And yet still they fight. Still they awaken when called. Still they face their former brothers in battle and do what necessity demands. Because the alternative, to refuse service or break down completely, would mean admitting that the traitors have won, that the betrayal has succeeded in destroying not just the brotherhood of the Great Crusade, but the loyalty and resolve of those who remained true. This is perhaps the cruelest aspect of what it means to be a pre-heresy Dreadnought, who has witnessed his Primarch's betrayal. You are forced to become a weapon aimed at your own past, destroying piece by piece the very brotherhood that once gave your service meaning. Every battle won is also a small defeat, another fracture in the bonds that were supposed to be eternal. Every traitor killed is also a brother lost, not to corruption, but to the necessities of war. The brotherhood has been shattered beyond all hope of repair. And yet, the memory of what that brotherhood once meant, the ghost of the bonds that should have endured, continues to haunt every moment of a pre-heresy Dreadnought's existence, turning even victory into a form of grief. For a pre-heresy Dreadnought, memory is both treasure and curse. The ability to remember the Great Crusade, to carry first-hand knowledge of the Emperor walking among his sons, and the dream of a unified humanity ascending to the stars, is what makes these ancient warriors valuable beyond measure. But that same ability to remember also means they must carry the weight of betrayal across 10,000 years, unable to forget what was lost or what it cost. The nature of memory in a Dreadnought is strange and fragmentary. The organic components of the brain deteriorate slowly over the millennia, causing some memories to fade while others remain crystal clear for reasons that seem arbitrary. You might forget the name of your closest friend from before interment, but remember with perfect clarity the temperature readings during a battle 3,000 years ago. Emotional memories often persist longer than factual ones, but they become detached from context, leaving you with feelings of loss or joy or rage without clear recollection of what prompted those emotions. For a pre-heresy Dreadnought who has witnessed betrayal, this selective degradation of memory creates a particular kind of torment. The sharp, painful memories of discovering the heresy, of learning your Primarch had turned traitor, these often remain intact because they were encoded with such intense emotion. But the earlier memories, the ones from before the betrayal, these fade gradually. You lose the context that explains why the betrayal hurt so much, but you never lose the hurt itself. Imagine waking from stasis with a profound sense of loss, but only the vaguest recollection of what was lost. You know something precious was taken from you. You can feel the absence like a physical wound, but you can no longer clearly picture the faces of the brothers you lost, can no longer remember the specific words your Primarch spoke that made you believe in him so completely. The pain remains, sharper than ever, but the memories that would give that pain meaning have eroded like ancient inscriptions worn smooth by time. This creates a desperate need to hold on to whatever fragments remain. Pre-heresy Dreadnoughts often develop elaborate mental exercises designed to preserve their most important memories. They rehearse scenes from the Great Crusade over and over in their minds during the long periods of stasis, trying to keep the neural pathways active and prevent the organic decay that threatens to erase everything. They create mnemonic structures, associating memories with specific tactical scenarios or weapon configurations, anything that might help anchor those recollections in the more stable machine components of their consciousness. But even these efforts can only slow the inevitable erosion. Each awakening brings with it the painful discovery of memories that have slipped away since last you were conscious. You try to recall a specific campaign and find only fragments. You search for the face of a brother who died beside you at Istvan V and find that his features have blurred into indistinctness. You reach for your Primarch's voice as it was before the fall and find only echoes of echoes, sound without substance. The cruelest aspect of this gradual erasure is that you are aware it is happening. You know that with each passing century, more of the truth is being lost. The young Space Marines who wake you to hear stories about the Heresy, about the Great Crusade, about the Primarchs before their fall, they are receiving increasingly fragmented accounts as your ability to remember degrades. You are failing in your duty as a living repository of history, unable to prevent the slow corruption of the truth you carry. Some dreadnoughts attempt to compensate by recording their memories externally, creating detailed reports and testimonials that can be preserved in the chapter's archives. But this solution has its own problems. First, the act of recording memories changes them, flattens them into two-dimensional accounts that lack the emotional weight and experiential depth of true recollection. A written record of fighting beside Lim and Russ at Prospero is fundamentally different from the living memory of that experience, and something crucial is lost in the translation. Second, external records can be altered, either intentionally by those with political motives or accidentally through repeated copying and transmission errors. A dreadnought might wake to find that his carefully recorded testimony has been edited, with inconvenient truths removed or uncomfortable facts recontextualized to fit the current chapter's approved narrative. The living memory is immutable, even if degraded. The written record can be shaped to serve purposes the original witness never intended. Third, and perhaps most problematically, creating external records of their memories can actually accelerate the degradation of those memories within the dreadnought's consciousness. Having offloaded the information to a more stable medium, the organic brain may unconsciously relax its grip on those particular neural patterns, allowing them to fade more quickly. The very act of preservation becomes an act of loss. So most pre-heresy dreadnoughts guard their memories jealously, choosing to keep them internal despite knowing they will eventually fade. They become possessive of their recollections, reluctant to share too much detail even when questioned by chapter leadership. These memories are all they have left of who they were before interment, before betrayal, before 10,000 years of service reduced them to weapons with thoughts. Sharing them too freely feels like giving away pieces of their soul. But this possessiveness creates its own problems. If the ancient ones will not share their knowledge, then the truth of the heresy becomes increasingly obscured by legend and propaganda. The younger Space Marines, desperate to understand their origins and the reasons for the current state of the galaxy, are left with only fragmentary accounts and unreliable second-hand sources. The very information that could help them avoid repeating the mistakes of the past is locked away in the deteriorating minds of ancients who are too jealous of their memories to risk their loss through sharing. This creates tension between the dreadnoughts and the chapters they serve. The leadership wants access to first-hand accounts of the heresy, needs the tactical and strategic insights that only pre-heresy veterans can provide. But the dreadnoughts, recognizing that each telling erodes the memories a little more, become increasingly unwilling to cooperate. They are not being contrary or difficult. They are simply trying to preserve the last fragments of their identity against the relentless pressure of time and mechanical existence. For some pre-heresy dreadnoughts, the burden of memory becomes so great that they actively seek its erasure. They beg the tech marines to damage the parts of their neural interface that connect to long-term memory storage. They request mind-wiping protocols, that would strip away the capacity to recall anything before a certain date. They choose the oblivion of forgetting over the torture of remembering. These requests are almost always denied. The chapters and legions recognize that these ancient warriors are irreplaceable resources, living links to a pivotal moment in Imperial history. To allow them to forget would be to lose invaluable knowledge that cannot be recovered from any other source. So the Dreadnoughts are forced to continue carrying their burden, denied the mercy of forgetting even when remembering has become a form of torture. But a few, the truly desperate ones who can no longer bear the weight, find other ways to achieve the erasure they seek. They throw themselves into battles with such reckless abandon that they ensure their own destruction. They volunteer for the most dangerous deployments, take the greatest risks, fight with a ferocity that goes beyond even the usual Space Marine dedication to duty. They are not seeking glory. They are seeking the true death that has been denied them for so long, the final silence that will end both their service and their suffering. And when they finally fall, when their Dreadnought chassis is destroyed beyond hope of recovery, and their organic components are allowed to finally die, what dies with them? What knowledge is lost forever when a Pre-Heresy Dreadnought's memory finally fades into permanent darkness? We will never know. That is the terrible truth. Every time one of these ancient warriors falls, a unique perspective on the Horus heresy, an irreplaceable piece of historical truth, is lost to the ages. The official records remain, dry accounts of battles fought and decisions made, but the living memory, the experiential truth of what it was like to witness the betrayal firsthand, to see your Primarch fall to chaos, to watch your brothers turn on each other, this dies with the warrior who carried it. This is why the remaining Pre-Heresy Dreadnoughts are so precious to the Imperium. They are not simply weapons or tactical assets. They are living museums, repositories of truth in an age where truth has become increasingly difficult to discern. Every story they tell, every fragment of memory they share, is a gift beyond price to a galaxy that desperately needs to understand its own past. But that same preciousness makes their burden heavier. They are not allowed to simply be warriors. They must also be historians, witnesses, living testaments to events that shaped the entire future of humanity. And they must carry this burden while simultaneously watching their ability to fulfill it slowly degrade, knowing that with each passing century, more of the truth they hold is being lost to the entropy that claims all things given sufficient time. This is the burden of memory for a Pre-Heresy Dreadnought who has witnessed his Primarch's betrayal. It is not simply about remembering facts or dates or tactical details. It is about being responsible for preserving truth in a universe that often seems designed to obscure it. It is about maintaining the integrity of your recollections, even as the biological substrate that houses those memories slowly fails. It is about making impossible choices between sharing your knowledge and preserving it, between service to others and protection of self. And through it all, through 10,000 years of this impossible burden, these ancient warriors endure. They guard their memories as jealously as they once guarded their battle brothers. They share what they must and keep private what they can. They fight against the tide of forgetting with every weapon at their disposal, knowing the fight is ultimately futile, but refusing to surrender until the final darkness claims them. Because someone must remember. Someone must bear witness. Someone must carry the truth of what happened when the galaxy was young and the dream of unified humanity seemed achievable, so that future generations can learn from the mistakes of the past and perhaps, against all odds, avoid repeating them. And if that burden must be carried by consciousness trapped in a machine, memory preserved in a deteriorating brain floating in amniotic fluid, then so be it. The burden will be carried, the truth will be preserved. For as long as even one Pre-Heresy Dreadnought remains conscious, the full weight of betrayal will not be forgotten. After 10,000 years of service, after countless awakenings and deployments, After carrying the unbearable weight of betrayal across an age of the galaxy, what purpose remains for a pre-heresy dreadnought who has witnessed his Primarch's fall? This is perhaps the most fundamental question these ancient warriors must answer, and the responses they find shape not just their own continued existence, but the legacies they leave behind. For some, purpose is found in the simplest possible terms: continue serving. The Emperor still reigns from the Golden Throne. The Imperium still needs defenders. Traitor forces still threaten humanity from the Eye of Terror and beyond. As long as these facts remain true, as long as there is still a war to fight, then their purpose is clear. They are weapons in the Emperor's arsenal, and weapons do not need elaborate justification for their existence. They simply need to function when required. This approach has the virtue of simplicity. It requires no complex philosophical reasoning or wrestling with questions of meaning. You wake, you fight, you return to stasis. The cycle continues until either you are destroyed or the Imperium falls. In the meantime, you do your duty without excessive introspection or emotional investment. You become, in essence, exactly what your mechanical components suggest you should be: a weapon that happens to contain a human consciousness rather than a human who happens to be housed in a weapon. But for other dreadnoughts, this reduction of purpose to mere function is insufficient. They need more than just orders to follow and enemies to destroy. They need to believe that their continued existence serves some larger meaning beyond simply delaying the inevitable. These warriors struggle to find purpose in a universe that has proven itself to be far darker and more terrible than anything they imagined during the Great Crusade. 1. Common resolution is to embrace a role as teacher and guide. If you carry memories of the heresy, if you witnessed firsthand what happens when loyalty fails and corruption takes hold, then perhaps your purpose is to pass those lessons on to future generations. You become not just a warrior, but a living cautionary tale, a monument to the dangers of hubris and the necessity of eternal vigilance. This role gives meaning to the suffering you have endured. Every painful memory of betrayal becomes a tool for educating the young about the signs of corruption. Every battle fought against traitor forces becomes a lesson in the tactics and strategies necessary to oppose chaos. Your existence as a witness to tragedy becomes itself a form of service, a way of ensuring that the mistakes of the past are not forgotten, even as the specific details fade from general knowledge. But this role also requires a delicate balance. How much do you tell the young about the heresy? Do you share the full, complicated truth about the circumstances that led various Primarchs to fall? Or do you simplify the narrative into clear heroes and villains, good and evil, loyalty and betrayal, knowing that complexity might create doubt in warriors who need absolute certainty to function? Most pre-heresy dreadnoughts opt for some form of the simplified narrative, at least when speaking to regular battle brothers. The full truth is too complicated, too morally ambiguous, too likely to create the kind of uncertainty that can paralyze warriors in combat situations. Better to present the heresy as a straightforward betrayal by Primarchs who were always corrupt, who chose chaos over the Emperor because of personal failings. This version is less accurate but more useful for maintaining the morale and clarity of purpose that Space Marines need. But in private, in conversations with chapter leadership or fellow ancients, a different story might emerge. Here, with those who have the context to understand complexity, a pre-heresy dreadnought might share the fuller truth. He might speak of Magnus's hubris and the Emperor's failure to properly explain the dangers of sorcery. He might describe Mortarian's sense of betrayal when the Emperor robbed him of his final vengeance. He might detail how Fulgrim was corrupted by a demon sword rather than turning traitor through free choice. These private sharings serve a different purpose than the public teaching. They are not about inspiring troops or maintaining morale. They are about preserving the complex truth for those few who need to understand it, who must make decisions that require nuanced knowledge of how loyalty can fail and corruption can take hold. These are the conversations that happen in the darkest hours, when the facade of certainty can be allowed to slip, and the full weight of historical truth can be acknowledged. For some dreadnoughts, particularly those from traitor legions who remained loyal, purpose is found in redemption, not personal redemption, for they have nothing to redeem themselves for, but redemption of their legion's legacy. They fight not simply because the Imperium needs defenders, but because every battle they win, every loyal service they render, is a small strike against the stain of betrayal their legion carries. This is perhaps most clearly seen in dreadnoughts who served loyally during the Great Crusade and survived the purges at Istvan III. Warriors like Rylanor, who spent 10,000 years nursing his hatred for a fallen Primarch, or the less famous ancients who serve in Black Shield companies, or with successor chapters that have hidden their genetic heritage. These warriors cannot undo the betrayal. They cannot restore their legion to what it was before the fall, but they can, through their own continued loyalty and service, prove that the gene seed was not inherently tainted, that the capacity for loyalty and honor existed within their legion, even when the Primarch who shaped that legion chose corruption. Every traitor they destroy, every battle they survive, every moment of continued service becomes evidence that the betrayal was not inevitable, was not written into the genetic code they carry. This is a kind of defiance, a refusal to accept that the sins of the Gene Father must be visited upon all his sons. It is exhausting work, a burden that compounds rather than diminishes with time, but for many it provides the sense of purpose necessary to continue functioning. Others find purpose in witness itself, simply continuing to exist, maintaining consciousness and memory across the ages becomes its own form of service. They are living testaments to the reality of the heresy, proof that the official histories are not simply propaganda or myth. In an Imperium where truth is increasingly difficult to determine, where records are lost or corrupted or deliberately altered, the testimony of a pre-heresy dreadnought carries enormous weight. This role requires them to endure not just physical combat, but the slow erosion of their memories and identity. They must fight against the mechanical tendency to forget emotion and retain only tactical data. They must preserve the human elements of their consciousness, even when those elements cause them pain. They must remain witnesses, fully conscious and aware, even when unconsciousness would be a mercy. It is perhaps the hardest purpose to maintain, because it offers no tangible rewards and no clear metric of success. You simply continue to exist, to remember, to bear witness, and you do so knowing that eventually your organic brain will fail completely, your memories will be lost, and your witness will end. But until that day comes, you persist, because someone must, because the truth matters even when maintaining it brings only suffering. For a rare few, purpose is found in hope. Despite everything they have witnessed, despite 10,000 years of war and betrayal, and watching the Imperium slowly decay, these warriors maintain the belief that the Emperor's dream was not fundamentally flawed. They hold on to the conviction that unity is still possible, that humanity can still ascend, that the Primarchs who fell might someday be redeemed or replaced by new heroes equal to the challenge. This hope is not based on evidence or rational calculation. After 10,000 years, the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that the Imperium is in terminal decline, that chaos is ascendant, that the dream of the Great Crusade will never be realized. But these dreadnoughts choose to hope anyway, not because it is reasonable, but because the alternative is despair. And despair, they understand, is itself a form of surrender to the darkness that consumed their fallen brothers. Their hope is not naive optimism. It is a conscious choice to believe in possibility, despite all evidence to the contrary. It is faith, not in the inevitability of victory, but in the worthiness of the fight, regardless of outcome. It is the determination to continue serving, not because you expect to see the final triumph, but because the service itself has meaning beyond its ultimate results. This might seem like the weakest foundation for purpose, hope unsupported by evidence or reason. But in practice, it may be the strongest. Because hope, once chosen, does not depend on external validation. Defeats do not diminish it. Betrayals do not shatter it. Time does not erode it. As long as the warrior chooses to maintain hope, it remains, providing purpose and meaning even in the darkest hours. The legacy of pre-heresy dreadnoughts who have witnessed their Primarch's betrayal is complex and multifaceted. They are simultaneously heroes and tragic figures, living monuments and cautionary tales, sources of wisdom and embodiments of suffering. What they leave behind when they finally fall is not just tactical knowledge or historical testimony, but a template for how to endure when endurance seems impossible. They teach that loyalty need not be rewarded to be valuable, that service need not lead to victory to be meaningful. That purpose can be found even in a universe that has proven itself to be fundamentally hostile to the dreams and ideals that once motivated your service. That the human spirit, even when reduced to fragments of organic tissue sustained by mechanical systems, can still choose to fight against the darkness. This is their gift to the Imperium they serve, proof that the betrayal of 10,000 years ago, as terrible as it was, did not succeed in destroying everything worth fighting for. That some lights refuse to be extinguished no matter how strong the wind. That loyalty, properly understood, is not contingent on receiving what you hoped for, but is instead a choice made and remade in every moment of consciousness. And perhaps that is the most important legacy of all. Not the tactical data they provide or the historical testimony they preserve, but the simple fact of their continued existence. As long as even one pre-heresy dreadnought remains conscious, as long as even one ancient warrior who witnessed the betrayal firsthand continues to serve the Emperor despite everything, then the darkness has not fully won. The dream may be deferred or corrupted or seemingly impossible to achieve, but it is not dead. Not yet. Not while witnesses to its birth still draw breath, even if that breath is filtered through mechanical life support systems and processed by failing organic tissue floating in amniotic fluid. This is what it means, in the final analysis, to be a pre-heresy dreadnought who has learned his Primarch turned traitor. It means carrying an impossible burden with dignity. It means finding purpose in a universe that has proven all your original purposes to be based on false premises. It means witnessing the worst betrayal imaginable and choosing loyalty anyway. Not because loyalty has been rewarded, but because the alternative is surrender to the same darkness that consumed your gene father. It means enduring. And in a universe like Warhammer 40,000, where the grim darkness of the far future seems to stretch into eternity without hope of dawn, endurance itself becomes a form of victory. We have journeyed deep into the darkness, exploring one of the most profound tragedies in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. We have seen what it means to be a pre-heresy dreadnought, awakening to discover that the Primarch you served, the Gene Father whose legacy runs through your very cells, has turned traitor. We have examined the psychological torment, the shattered brotherhood, the burden of memory, and the desperate search for purpose in a universe that has proven itself to be far darker than anything you imagined during the golden age of the Great Crusade. The story of these ancient warriors is not a happy one. There are no simple victories here, no redemption that erases the suffering, no answers that resolve the fundamental contradictions of their existence. They are tragic figures in the truest sense, heroes brought low not by their own failings, but by the betrayals of those they trusted most. But their tragedy is also their triumph. Because despite everything, they endure. Despite 10,000 years of suffering, despite the erosion of their memories and identities, despite being forced to destroy the very brothers they once fought beside, they continue to serve. And in that continuation, in that absolute refusal to surrender, even when surrender would be the rational choice, they demonstrate something crucial about the nature of loyalty and the strength of the human spirit. They prove that betrayal, however terrible, does not have to be the end of the story. That consciousness can survive the destruction of everything it once believed in. That purpose can be found even in the ashes of dead dreams. That the choice to remain loyal means something profound, even when loyalty brings no reward beyond the satisfaction of having made that choice. The pre-heresy dreadnoughts who have witnessed their Primarch's betrayal stand as monuments to these truths. They are living testaments to the fact that the Horus heresy, for all its horror and devastation, did not succeed in destroying the fundamental strength of those who remained true. The dream of the Great Crusade may be dead, but the warriors who fought for that dream continue. And as long as they continue, as long as even one ancient voice can still speak the truth about what was lost and why it mattered, then the darkness has not achieved complete victory. If you found this journey into the darkness meaningful, if the stories of these ancient warriors resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We explore the deepest, darkest, most thought-provoking aspects of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, bringing you the lore and stories that make this setting so compelling. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there are also stories worth telling, truths worth preserving, and lessons worth learning. And sometimes, those stories are told by ancient warriors floating in amniotic fluid within walking tombs of ceramite and adamantium. Warriors who remember when the future was bright and who continue to fight, even now that all brightness has been extinguished. Remember them, honor their sacrifice, and never forget what it cost them to remain loyal when loyalty demanded everything and promised nothing in return. For the Emperor, for the memory of brotherhood, for the dream that once was, and perhaps, against all odds, might someday be again.